mentioned, we've really been digging into forgiveness. And I even mentioned right at the beginning of this series about how often churches, preachers, whatever, they talk about these really important these really important things, beliefs that we're supposed to believe and buy into, but they often don't explain how to actually do it and make that happen. So the first week we talked about what does it really mean to forgive, why should we forgive. We looked at the parable of the unmerciful or unforgiving servant. The reading mentioned this where Jesus talks about forgiving 70 times 7 times. Basically, it's not really about how many times you forgive. It's much more than that. We talked about how forgiveness in the Bible literally means to let go. Forgiveness is something that happens in our heart, and Jesus makes that subtle point right at the end of that parable where he says, unless you're willing to forgive someone in your heart, God won't forgive you. And we talked about what I believe that means in the first week. And I also mentioned forgiveness is something that we learn through practice, through actually doing and engaging in. Last week we talked about how to forgive, and I used the story of Jesus hanging on the cross after being falsely accused and tortured and beaten and hung on the cross, where he actually takes that moment to forgive his perpetrators. And what it took for him to do that. And I made the statement that unless you are able to give love and compassion to someone, you are unable to forgive them. In other words, if you hate someone, it's impossible to forgive them. We've been given these reflections to work on during the week, and if you haven't been working on these reflections, I would encourage you to pick up all 3 later today. I'm going to make sure they're all posted on the website under the resources on the church website, because it's not enough just to hear something and then just decide that I'm going to do it. You actually, like I talked about, put things into practice, which is called Praxis. Putting into practice those things that we believe and we want to change about ourselves. And so these meditations and these reflections are all about that. It's about shifting the way that we think, because we all know that our brain is super complex, and we want to do plenty of things that we never end up doing. And so these are a way of encouraging us and taking us really deep into this theme of forgiveness. This morning, as I was doing research on what I wanted to talk about this morning, I actually came across a TEDx video by someone named Sarah Montana. And it was so good, and it was so well done. I thought there's no possible way that I could preach what she's saying better than her. And so, I don't know if this has ever been done, but I'm showing a TED video this morning. And I want you to, it's a really well done thing. We're going to talk a little bit about it after it's over. It's about 15 minutes long. And her story is really powerful, so I hope that you enjoy it, and then we're going to discuss it a little bit more afterwards. So let's see if that video works. Ben? Should be the next thing. In my last church, First Baptist, I was cursed with PowerPoint and things like never working, media crashing, and so I should have practiced this with you, Ben, before.
You should. The video just hasn't started yet. It's not really starting.
No bueno.
Sometimes I would like run up to the sound room.
Yeah, and it would start automatically?
Here, let me see if I get it.
You go.
Technical difficulties.
Standalone display on the calendar. Go back there.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's see this.
In the summer of 2016, I did the sensible thing. I quit my cushy job at a hedge fund to write a play about my family's murder. I told my friends and family that this was about art, but in truth, I was on a spiritual vision quest. I was seeking closure to a relationship with someone that I barely knew, the kid who killed my mother and brother. He was my friend's younger brother, a kid from our neighborhood. He came over a handful of times to raid our family's snack cabinet. My mom actually used to wave to him from the van and say, "He's going through a hard time. I just want to make sure he knows that I see him." He broke into our house a couple of days before Christmas, looking for some stuff to sell for cash. When he came across my brother Jim asleep on the couch, he panicked, shot him, and fled the scene. Then he realized he forgot his coat. By the time he came back, my mom had found Jim. Because he knew that she recognized him, and to quote him, because she wouldn't stop screaming, he shot and killed her too. He is currently serving back-to-back life sentences in a prison in southwestern Virginia. Over the course of the next 7 years, I somehow managed not to hate him, but my grief and trauma did something a little bit weirder. He became a non-person to me. He wasn't a person, he was the face of all evil. He was the twister that came through and ripped up our house and threw it in some hellish version of Oz. But not a 17-year-old boy, or I realize now, a 24-year-old man. A man who came of age in a cell, if he came of age at all. As I sat down to write the villain of my play and my life, I realized I had a name, some fractured childhood memories, a brief court document, and nothing else to go on. So I went to the source of all answers, Google. I Googled his prisoner ID number, then that's when the internet sucker punched me in the face. 2/3 of prisoners in his penitentiary spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement in 8x10 cells with slats for light. Conditions are so bad that in 2012, the entire prison went on a hunger strike. As I scrolled through case after case of human rights violations at this prison, suddenly, he became a person to me again. I remember the first time I saw Mom and Jim's bodies in the funeral home, how my hand recoiled when I felt the small destructive supernova that the bullet made in the back of Jim's skull. My mom's face just collapsed in on itself. Not her, just flesh and bones in that black dress we bought at Kohl's the week before. Those are my most painful memories. But when I pictured him, beaten, starving, crying out in a dark cell, yeah, that was somehow just as painful. And I realized it was because we were still connected. That steel tether of trauma that he hooked into my side when he killed them was still there, and I had been lurching against its pull and dragging him through the mud for the past 7 years, whether I knew it or not. And it was with a little horror that I realized that he may have killed them, but I chose to keep us connected. And so after weighing through all the options, I mean literally every option at my disposal, I realized the only way to get rid of this dude was to forgive him. going to. Because the truth was, I thought that I already had forgiven him. I told my friends I forgave him. I told my family I forgave him. I even said I forgive you in the national news. So if saying you forgive someone is not the same thing as doing it, why was this guy still hooked into my side, dragging me around, making me do dumb things like quit my job to write a play? Turns out there is no fake it till you make it in forgiveness, even though that's exactly what society expects us to do. So how do you forgive effectively once and for all? That question started another Google rabbit hole, and then the theological rabbit hole, and then the psychiatric journal and medical journal rabbit hole, until finally, my poor husband came home to a frantic wife, feral, just pacing the apartment, spewing statistics about forgiveness like, did you know that there are 62 passages in the Bible with the word forgive, and 27 with the word forgiveness? Not a single one tells you how to do it. They just say how great it is. It's like the Nike of spiritual gifts. Just do it. Oh. And then there's this Dr. Wayne guy over here who says, to forgive, we just gotta let go, be like water. What does that mean? My husband approached me very cautiously. Sweetie, what you doing? Trying to forgive the kid who killed my family, but nobody will tell me how. Oh, there are endless 5-star historical Yelp reviews for forgiveness. The sales pitch is fantastic, but literally, what do I do? I think I was asking the wrong question. Starting with how, but really what I needed to know was why. Why forgive? Why do it? And that's when I discovered that most of us are forgiving for the wrong reasons. Some victims, like me, try to forgive right away because it's the right thing to do. But if we're honest with ourselves, there's only 3 reasons a victim forgives automatically. 1, you think that forgiving quickly will make you a good person. That's an easy mistake to make, right? If forgiveness is good, a good person should forgive right away. But in all my research, I actually didn't find a timeline for forgiveness. Everybody was just really desperately urging us to get around to it because they knew we didn't want to. Even Jesus, when he talks about turning the other cheek, isn't talking about forgiveness. He's talking about nonviolence. There has to be a middle ground between letting someone off the hook right away and going full-on eye for an eye on them. 2, victims feel a lot of pressure to forgive from everyone else. It can come from your friends, from your family, from the media, from mixed-up religious messaging. The truth is, everyone wants you to forgive quickly so that they can feel more comfortable and they can move on. That's a crappy reason to do anything. 3, you think that forgiveness is a shortcut to healing. You think if you skip to the end of the story, you can bypass all the angry, vulnerable, messy healing crap. Spoiler alert, that one will come back to bite you in the butt. For me, it was all 3 reasons. I want to be a good person, I love pleasing other people, and I hate the vulnerable, angry, messy, healing crap. It turns out that forgiveness is such a potent force that none of those reasons were strong enough to make it stick. Just like love, if your motivation is selfish, even a good selfish thing like healing, it will collapse in on itself like a dying star. So why do it? Why forgive? It can't heal you. It won't save you or the other person. It can't make you a good person, at least not all by itself, because that's not what forgiveness is designed to do. Forgiveness is designed to set you free. When you say, I forgive you, what you're really saying is, I know what you did. It's not okay. But I recognize that you are more than that. I don't want to hold us captive to this thing anymore. I can heal myself, and I don't need anything from you. And after you say that, and you mean it, then it's just you. No chains, no prisoners, just the good, the bad, and the ugly of whoever that person was from the start. Our culture thinks that vengeance is freedom, but it is a total prison. Any act of violence, whether it's emotional or physical, is this weird, twisted form of intimacy. That's why the Greeks said that a death by a good man was a good death. Think about it. Every time somebody thinks about my mom and my brother, they think about the fact that they're not here. And then they think about the kid who did this. That one act of violence actually bound the 3 of them together in people's minds for eternity. When we choose vengeance, we're actually signing a blood oath to chain our story to our enemies for the rest of time. Forgiveness is the only real path to freedom. But to get free, you have to get super specific about what exactly it is that you're forgiving. because you cannot forgive something that didn't happen to you. In my research, I came across this idea from Judaism that hit me in the chest. In Judaism, the family can't forgive murderers because they were not killed. They can only forgive the pain, anguish, and grief that the loss caused them. This was a total jackpot moment for me. I had to compartmentalize my damage. Not what happened to Mom and Jim, not what happened to my family, not what happened to society. What happened to me? This is why justice often feels really cold for victims. It's justice's job to assess what is owed. And it is the criminal justice system's job to assess what is owed to society, not to victims. It is up to us to get really clear individually on what we are owed. You can't forgive your father for beating your mother. You can only forgive him for how sad, alienated, and angry that made you feel. I couldn't forgive him for killing Mom and Jim. I'm still here. I had to assess my damages. The wedding I had without the two of them, the parts of me that my husband and kids will never get to understand without knowing the two of them. The way my life was supposed to start at 22, and he broke it. My inherent sense of safety and belonging, which I gotta be honest, I don't think are coming back. Those are my damages. Most of us avoid forgiveness like the plague because we do not want to look at our wounds. Wounds are scary, they are nasty, they are icky. It is why most of us look away when we donate blood. It is way easier to take all of that emotion and channel it into rage at another person. And I gotta be honest with you, I say, do it. Thought this would be about forgiveness, huh? It's an important part of the process. Anger is important. It is the fire that cauterizes our wounds and lets them scar over and heal. Too much anger, and yeah, you'll get third-degree burns. Without a little bit of heat, you'll never scar over, and you'll never know exactly what happened to you. And if you don't know what happened to you, you can't know what you're forgiving. But once you know what's happened to you, it's time for some good old-fashioned justice. Sorry, I married a Texan. So what, in justice's name, am I owed? An apology? An explanation? A front row seat to their torture chamber? Maybe. Not the last part, but maybe you are owed those things in general. And 9 times out of 10, if you ask for those things, you will get them. Which is why forgiveness is not the right thing in most situations. Forgiveness is only right when waiting for what we're owed comes at too high a cost. In all those years, with that guy chained to my side, I got a lot done. I went to grad school, I married a wonderful man, I started a career that I honestly really love, but I did it all a little more slowly. And I wasn't just dragging him along, I was dragging my mother and brother in the process, twisting the 3 of them up together in those chains. Pretty soon, that little posse started to crowd me out of my own body and my own experience. And one day, losing myself in order to punish him and keep the 2 of them alive felt like too high a cost to bear. It was there, in that crossroads, when I knew what had happened to me. I knew what I was owed. And I decided that choosing myself was more important than being right. That's when I was ready to forgive. So I stepped away from Google, and I didn't ask any more questions, and I wrote him a letter. I tore unused pages out of my mom's journals, actually, and I wrote. I told him that what happened on December 19th, 2008 was not okay, and would probably never be okay for either of us. But just because it wasn't okay, that didn't mean he owed me anything. Not an apology, not an explanation, not his role as my villain. I told him that I hated to be reduced to one thing that happened to me one day. I yearned to be more, to be whole. And I didn't think that I could do that if I looked at another person and reduced him to one thing he did one day and made evil to some of his parts. I told him that I wished him a lifetime full of healing, and that I forgave him. And then, without thinking, I plopped that letter into a mailbox on the corner of Flatbush Avenue and Church. For the first 10 steps, there was this lightness of being. And then that lightness started to feel like the lurch in your stomach when you hit a spiritual tripwire. My chest unwound, it burst, and suddenly I was alone with myself. I mean, really alone, giving birth to a stranger, saying hello to a girl that I hadn't spoken to in 7 years. Sometimes I miss him. Not him, the monster that I created. Things were a lot harsher in black and white, but they were a lot simpler when I had a villain to fight, and more familiar. As long as he was around, Mom and Jim were never that far away. They were characters just off stage, waiting in the wings, the precipice on stage talking about them. But my story was about the three of them, always. To get free, I had to get clear on exactly what contract I was shredding. Once I did that, I found myself alone, center stage, in the spotlight, with endless possibilities. Real forgiveness has to let go of all expectations. You can't expect a certain outcome. You can't expect them to reply. You can't even expect to know who you're going to be on the other side of it. Forgiveness is really tricky. It's one of those tools that is only properly wielded when we have healed just enough that we have nothing left to lose. If you're still hemorrhaging in pain, it is too soon to forgive. If you can't roll up your sleeve and show me your scars and tell me exactly what happened to you, it's still too soon to forgive. It's never too late to let go of your villains and reclaim yourself. And if you're ready to let it all go, the grief, the pain, the anger, the trauma, and you're open to finding out who you are instead of always trying to prove yourself. I gotta be honest with you. All this forgiveness hype is legit. 10 out of 10, 5 stars, would highly recommend. Thank you.
I think that the message is encapsulated in this verse from Ephesians. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. And I just want to, I don't want to dissect this video with you. I think it's powerful without commentary, but I want to just highlight some of the things and the phrases that really stood out for me. He became a non-person to me. He wasn't a person. He was the face of all evil. Can we relate to that? As I scrolled through case after case of human rights violations at this prison, suddenly he became a person to me again. You can see the first step in the process. He became a person to me again. Turns out there's no fake it till you make it in forgiveness, even though that's exactly what society expects us to do. So how do you forgive effectively once and for all? Did you know that there are 62 passages in the Bible with the word forgive and 27 with the word forgiveness? Not a single one tells you how to do it. That's when I discovered that most of us are forgiving for the wrong reasons. There's only 3 reasons a victim forgives automatically. 1, you think that forgiving quickly will make you a good person. 2, victims feel a lot of pressure to forgive from everyone else. It can come from your friends, from your family, from the media, from mixed up religious messaging. And 3, you think that forgiveness is a shortcut to healing. You think if you skip to the end of the story, you can bypass all the anger, the vulnerability, and messy healing crap. Sarah Montana says, forgiveness is designed to set you free. When you say, I forgive you, what you're really saying is, I know what you did. It's not okay. But I recognize that you are more than that. I don't want to hold us captive to this thing anymore. I can heal myself and I don't need anything from you. But to get free, you have to get super specific about what exactly it is that you're forgiving, because you cannot forgive something that didn't happen to you. It is up to us to get really clear individually on what we are owed. And one day, losing myself in order to punish him and keep the two of them alive felt like too high a cost to bear. It was there, in that crossroads, when I knew what had happened to me. I knew what I was owed. And I decided then, choosing myself was more important than being right. That's when I was ready to forgive. And lastly, forgiveness is really tricky. It's one of those tools that is only properly wielded when we have healed just enough that we have nothing left to lose. If you're still hemorrhaging in pain, it is too soon to forgive. If you can't roll up your sleeve and show me your scars and tell me exactly what happened to you, it is too soon to forgive. But it's never too late to let go of your villains and reclaim yourself. And if you're ready to let it all go, the grief, the pain, the anger, the trauma, and you're open to finding out who you are instead of always trying to prove yourself, all this forgiveness hype is legit. If that video spoke to you, if you found it was impactful, if you think that there's other people that may be interested in that video, it was actually a little tricky to find, but I put the video on the church website under resources. It'll be there for a while. I would suggest, however, that if you know somebody struggles with forgiveness, that you don't send them an email or call them up and say, you need to watch this, because that's number 2 in where people are trying to make you forgive. So don't encourage that. But if somebody, you're having a conversation and this idea comes up of forgiveness, then maybe you can pass this video on. This week, I'm sending you home with another meditation/reflection. And this one is where it sort of gets a little difficult, where the rubber meets the road, so you could say, in forgiveness. Because up until now, it's been kind of easy. If you've done the previous week meditation, the first one was just, what do we understand about forgiveness? And the second, and even I think in the first week, I asked you to sort of even bring up people in your life that you probably know you should be forgiving, or you want to journey into that with these people. Last week was compassion and love. The first step, you'll notice in her story, in Sarah's story, the first thing that happened was she actually found a place of compassion and love for the villain in her story. And that's what we talked about last week. It's the first step. The next step is to actually practice forgiveness. And it's difficult, to know exactly how you will perceive this reflection when you take it home and you try it out. And so I just want to go over it briefly and explain sort of what the goal here is in this meditation. For instance, right at the start it says, forgiveness can benefit us in 2 ways. First, our inner self benefits, because when we forgive from our heart and truly let go, we can move forward with more ease, more love, and a greater sense of joy. And secondly, our outer self, our interpersonal relationships with other people benefits, because forgiveness can lead to reconciliation. And I should note, reconciliation, where two people kind of, make up and make everything right and move forward, having learned and grown, isn't always possible. But it is something that God's Word encourages us to move into and to work on. Because really, that's what we're here for. The church, our mission, is to work with God in His plan for reconciliation with all creation. So the reflection meditation starts out by making sure you find a comfortable and safe place. You won't be interrupted. To take some time to relax. To let go of all the other concerns and worries that may be surrounding you at the time. And it starts with being self-compassionate. And so you're going to begin by acknowledging that, yeah, we're not perfect. And there are those people in our lives that we've hurt. We can even name the people that we know that we've hurt. And then we're going to take some time in this meditation to think of the times that we've been forgiven and what that feels like and when we've received the love and compassion of others. And then, when you're ready, you can bring to mind a person that you think you want to move towards forgiveness in. And it's important that you acknowledge the offense and the hurt, and that it's okay to be angry. And to really focus, or to really think about and bring to mind the extent of the brokenness in your life because of this. And this step you don't want to rush. Because like Sarah mentioned, you need to know what you're owed. And then it just walks through some steps on what to say, how to say, to move towards forgiveness. And throughout this entire thing, it's really important that you remember that forgiveness is a journey. And we may not even be ready in some cases to forgive. But be gracious and patient with yourself. So I encourage you guys to check this thing out. Again, if you haven't done the first two, I would really encourage you guys to do the first two meditations, which would maybe, pick 3 times this week to find a quiet time. And then we have this wonderful opportunity next Sunday to share. Because you'll remember when I talked about church praxis and putting things into practice, part of what we are called to do is to find ways to motivate one another and to encourage one another. And so if it's just me up here saying, this is really great, this is awesome, well, that's just one person. I mean, it's part of the reason why I thought it would be cool to see somebody else's story. But what is best is when we can see and experience each other's stories. So I encourage you this week to write down some stuff. Write down what you've learned. Maybe something that you've learned you didn't realize. And when you share that, you can help other people maybe come to that revelation as well. And I also encourage you guys to come out tonight, because when we think about forgiveness, when we think about reconciliation, it's not just about us. There's a lot of brokenness out there. And a lot of brokenness that we've been called into mission to help heal. And so tonight we're going to be sort of diving a little bit into what that looks like on a larger scale. Let's pray. Father God, we once again thank you that you have set before us the way of life. And we ask for the help of you, Holy Spirit, to lead and to guide us on that path. And Jesus, we thank you for being the example. Thank you for showing us the way. Pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.